Follow me to build a Goblin-Town, highly competitive, multi-system, Middle-earth strategy battle game army. It is easy to paint for beginners and pros alike with the 4 steps I will show you. If you are or know somebody interested in tabletop games, this is what you need to show them.
You are watching HALLOWMORTIS.
But first, let me give you the story of how I got into tabletop games. When I was growing up, I had a school friend who lived not that far away from a games workshop. He ended up becoming interested in Warhammer, first Warhammer Fantasy Battles and then later the Lord of the Rings. And because he was interested, I was interested. It was my hobby for years, although to be honest I don't know how much I actually played. So, when years later a friend from church offhand mentioned that he played, he invited me to have a game with his sets of figures, allowing me to borrow them to join in at a local tournament. He has a similar story to mine, except he never stopped playing, and thus had accumulated a reasonably large, although not comprehensive, collection. That's probably the biggest difference between a tabletop game, like Middle-earth strategy battle game, and a board game, that instead of buying a box once and being done, everybody has their own army, which they design and assemble and paint, and thus the game is just as much about sharing what you have made as it is about the rules and strategy game that lies underneath. The setting and narrative flavour of the game is derived from a set of films made in the early 2000s, which was 10 years later expanded with the prequel trilogy of 3 more films. Quite a lot of the people who play the game watch these films as children and have thus have quite a fondness for them, although that isn't myself. Everybody, from the protagonists and antagonists, to stray foot soldiers and civilians, has been given a set of rules and a points value. Over time, more and more obscure parts of the setting being added into the game. Unfortunately, however, for the uninitiated it's easy to make a mistake. Having a friend who's already into it and knows what they're on about is really helpful. So I think it'll be useful for you to see my thought process. When I was growing up I collected Easterlings, who are humans who have aligned themselves with Sauron and the rather unapologetically named forces of evil. The human nature of the Faustian bargain that they have made, and the ordered nature of their command, resonated with me as a youngster. They were the most popular army at the tournament I went to, although I think that has more to do with the fact that for 85 real-world pounds you can get one hero character, and with that hero character you can go on the internet and find somebody else's army list, which coincidentally happens to be the most powerful in the game. I wanted to find an army where I didn't have to overpay, without being an overload of branded names and corporate speak, and to be fun to play. After the assembly step comes the second step, acrylics. To create the cave mixture, I mix 50% builder's sand and 50% cheap black acrylic craft paint. I scar the plastic base's surface before applying the paste. I go outside and spray all the models with a can of plain white primer, which will stick to the models, whether plastic, metal or any other material. I only use a cheap unbranded airbrush. As most of the model's surface is skin, I am going to only use the airbrush to create an all-over gradient without masking. Acrylic white ink mixed with raw sienna, about 3:1, gets a pleasant peach colour. Inks flow beautifully through the airbrush. Hold your models to be only spraying within a zenithal 45-degree cone of the model's zenith. To have a shadowy purple, mix your red ink and cyan ink in equal parts. This time spraying within a nadiral 45-degree cone of the model's nadir. Just because you are working in a batch, you shouldn't forget to examine each sculpt for shadow and highlight placement. I like to mentally approximate each model as a composition of simple geometric shapes, cylinders, spheres, cuboids and so forth. I then block in the colour of other materials. I use multiple thin coats of acrylic paint applied using a synthetic hair paintbrush for an opaque and uniform colour. I used a beige brown on wood and leather, a cold light grey on the hair, weapons and anything metal, a dull yellow on fabric, a cream colour on the skulls and bone, a dull red on remaining decorations, and finally dot the eyes with bright red. While performing this step, all you need fits nicely in a biscuit tin, so it is easy to transport and you can easily just hang out and paint anywhere. Likewise, while using acrylics, firmly handing somebody a paintbrush and telling them to paint all of the X part, Y colour, is an easy way to introduce somebody to hobbying while chewing the fat. In the next step, I switch from using water-based acrylic paint to oil paints and white spirit. To protect the work done so far, I spray on a layer of satin varnish. Where the acrylic step's role is to map the colour of the model, the oil step's objective is to create contrast between shadow and highlight. To create dark shadows in the model's crevices, I use dark shades of oil paint, thinned with white spirit threefold. This mixture should be volatile and fluid. First, an all-over coat of a dark purple oil wash, and second, I come back with a more targeted black oil wash. The white spirit is non-polar, so does not exhibit the same cohesive beading up properties of water and water-based paint mixtures. For the highlight, I also use oil paint, however now with minimal thinning. I, with one brush, apply a comparatively thick coat of oil paint where I want the highlight. I highlight with pure white, warm yellow and raw sienna. A highlight of both lightness and saturation. I then use a second brush, leveraging the long drying times of oils, and feather out the edge of the still wet highlight for a smooth blended transition into the surrounding area. I have a third brush on hand, soaked in white spirit, which I use to wick off any mistakes before they dry. I consider the purpose of the base of the model to be fundamentally in contrast to that of the model itself, and in that light a different law takes hold, that the only thing better than perfect is standardized. I switch back to acrylic paint, and I lightly rub an only slightly damp brush with little unthinned paint over the sand, with each pass depositing a little paint on the raised edges. This technique is called dry brushing. I use progressively lighter, cold bluish greys. This is the same grey that I used on the model. Games Workshop's Middle-earth Goblin-Town models aren't the first time I have painted using this colour scheme, having used and developed it on a range of smaller projects. For other rule sets, I want all these models to be updated to have the same basing ready to be used together. One model, a Reaper Bones Pathfinder Dragon, is a WYSIWYG representation for an allied Moria Dragon. With a suitable base converter, I can play it in Middle-earth strategy battle game. However, the other models have a less clear application to the Middle-earth rule set. I varnish all my models with a matte varnish to give a uniform finish and to protect from damage when handling. To build on what I have created so far, I think I need to add additional goblin models. However, as I already have the paint scheme figured out and documented in this video, it will be easy to replicate and reproduce. This video concludes with a set of miniatures suitable for playing Middle-earth strategy battle game up to a respectable 500 points, alongside some other miniatures which could be used alongside the goblins in other game systems. All feedback is appreciated. Thank you to all those who aided in the construction of this video. Subscribing to the channel may alert you to my future uploads. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.